I'm going to go back in the room. Hi there, Dr. Sirois. How are you?
I'm fine. Sorry about that. It's having some tech issues at this end.
That's okay. No problem. Well, welcome, everybody. We're sorry about the delay, but one of the executive functions is shifting, and self-monitoring and emotional control are the other ones. So I'm just kind of welcoming everybody, and I think everyone online is here for an incredible treat. I'm actually going to skip my part because most people know the Study Pro. I am Debbie Rosen, and I'm so happy to welcome you. I actually just wanted to go to the introductions to make sure that everybody feels like we're back on track. I know it's afternoon there, Dr. Sirois, so I just wanted to say that I know you're going to go ahead and do an introduction for yourself, but I will share a little personal introduction. So two things to get, I think, the audience up to speed on how we met. I am a big TED Talk fan, and I was watching your TEDx talk at some point about procrastination. And I've learned a lot, and I've listened to a lot of speakers, but when I watched your talk, it was so captivating to me because I felt, first of all, there's certainly research behind it. It's what you've dedicated your life to do. But it also was such a kind of a surprise in the sense of why we really do procrastinate and how much power we can hold over it and some of the tools that we can use. And the second thing was to then further talk to you and hear that you've actually put a toolkit together that what's so important to you is to get feedback from everybody potentially on this webinar and people that are really struggling with procrastination. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be cool to bring this to our community? And so that's why we're so honored to have you here today and so appreciate you being here. And so now that you are here, and I know, like I said, you're going to introduce yourself a little bit more, I'm going to stop my sharing, and I know you can share your slides.
Yep.
And I will let everybody also know while you're doing that we are recording this. And so if you want to watch it again or you feel like you didn't capture something, Dr. Sirois also is going to take some questions at the end. I think she has the flexibility of staying a few minutes later if we want to ask questions. So if you want to share your slides, you can do that.
I will do that. Hopefully no more tech issues. And thank you for the, thank you for the lovely introduction as well. Let's just see. Yeah, that should be the slideshow. And I'm in Chrome this time, so I'm hoping.
Yay. Well, I see slides, so that's a great thing to say.
Yay. See, good from my perspective as well. Okay, good. So it's up there, and hopefully everything will go just fine here.
And I'm going to go ahead and put myself on mute, Dr. Sirois, and then I'll just pop in at the end.
Okay, great. Okay, well, yeah, thanks so much for having me here and giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about my research on procrastination and also, as was mentioned, the toolkit, which is you're going to see is sort of woven throughout the story of what I'm going to be presenting today. I do have a little bit of background. So I mainly study in the areas of personality, health, and social psychology. It's kind of varied because they all do very much overlap. I am originally from Canada, although I'm currently in the UK and have been since 2015. And most of my research does focus on factors that confer risk or resilience for physical health and well-being. And I sort of started in the risk area with procrastination and have moved more to more positive approaches for addressing those risks. So that you can see the varied topics I cover, such as procrastination, which I'll talk about today, perfectionism, self-compassion, which I'll also mention today, and a few others. And notably, yes, procrastination is sort of my most long-standing area of research. It's coming up on almost 25 years I've been studying, which is really hard to believe. But over that time, I've moved from looking at health consequences to sort of delving more into why people actually procrastinate and what we can do about it. And I've been involved in some self-help tools previously towards that end. Okay, so without further ado, I think we're going to start with a poll. Are we ready for a poll?
Yes, let me put that up.
Okay.
Here we go.
Yeah, so if everyone just think a little bit about your confidence level for understanding the main underlying cause of procrastination. And if you could just sort of answer on the poll there, then we can kind of take a look and see where everybody's baseline is before I share with you sort of some of what my research has revealed in terms of the main underlying causes of procrastination.
So can you see those results, Dr. Sirois?
Yeah, the votes are sort of coming in. I think we can kind of leave it there a little bit in the background for now, and then maybe we'll shut it down before the next poll, if that would work.
Sure.
Okay, let's see how people vote. Okay, great. Okay, so that's sort of a baseline level of where everyone's at, the current understanding of procrastination, which I hope will shift over the course of the talk today. Okay, so procrastination, right? It's something most of us are quite familiar with. And it may be from our own experiences. It may be from something that we've observed in others. You know, often it happens in the case that we sit down to do something and it's something we've been trying to get to for a number of weeks and we've kept pushing it aside. And then we're now the due date's fast approaching and we realize what's needed to complete it. And we realize that we don't have enough time. We start feeling overwhelmed and might have these feelings of dread. And so there's a whole number of layers that go on when we have that experience of procrastination. And a lot of it is quite emotional. And I'm going to be explaining a little bit more about why that is and what we can do to address some of that as well. So just to kind of give you an overview of what we're going to cover, I'm going to first talk about what is and isn't procrastination, because I think it's really important that when we discuss procrastination, we distinguish it from other forms of delay. Because often people say, oh yeah, I procrastinate on this, and they describe it and it's like, that's not actually procrastination. Like what you did was a good thing delaying there. And then we're going to go into the real reasons why people procrastinate, and then sort of finish up for the bulk of the rest of the talk, looking at some of the evidence-based strategies for addressing procrastination so you can get a little bit familiar with them. So many of us, like I said, have procrastinated, or we know someone who's procrastinated. And before we can get into really understanding what to do about procrastination or what the causes are, we need to actually have a very clear idea of what we mean by procrastination. And this is also very true for myself as a researcher of procrastination, because if we don't define it clearly, then what we're starting to address or use tools towards addressing may not be effective. So there's a few key ingredients in procrastination. Now, as I mentioned, procrastination is clearly a form of delay, and I think most of us have a good understanding of that. But although procrastination might be a form of delay, all delay is not procrastination. It's often mistaken for just your regular garden variety form of delay, but there's some very particular qualities of procrastination that distinguish it from regular delay. So this is one of the reasons why we say that although all delay is not procrastination, all procrastination is delay. And I think this is where the confusion comes, because we recognize when we procrastinate, we're delaying something, but not all types of delay actually qualify as procrastination. So the definition that we more formally use when we're researching procrastination, it really comes a lot from the roots, the Latin roots of the word procrastination, which is quite literally of tomorrow. And we have this sense of procrastination is putting something off till tomorrow. But whether we have good reason to put that off or not is a different issue. And so we view procrastination as a self-regulation issue. So there's difficulties there with regulating parts of our behavior and our thoughts and emotions as well. But the type of delay is always unnecessary and voluntary. So it's not that you necessarily delayed because you need more information before you could start something. right? So that would be necessary delay. And it's not that you delayed because somebody else told you you had to, or because there was some pending emergency that made it necessary and in some ways involuntary for you to delay. There's a sense of sort of willfulness in procrastination, whether it's conscious or unconscious, of saying, yeah, I'm going to put this off. Nobody else is telling you to, and there's not any good reason to do that. And this delay can take place in the start of an important task or somewhere along the line of completing. So you might start and then sort of pause and start procrastinating along the way with that. And again, the idea there is that it is an important task, but it's also an intended task. So it's something where you made an intention and you said, I am going to do this. Often there'll be a timeline attached to that. Okay, because with those timelines, if you don't meet that timeline or deadline, then there can be consequences. And that leads to the last component of procrastination, which is that there are negative consequences. And I often get asked by people, so can't procrastination be good sometimes? The simple short answer there is no. Okay, by definition, it is always harmful. And so if you're looking at a delay that might seem to have some positive consequences, that might be either serendipitous, because it just happened to have consequences, but at the time that you delayed, you didn't know those positive consequences were going to happen. Or you've done some kind of, there's been some kind of a post hoc rationalization, right? And I often hear, in the context of students and academics, this idea of, oh, I do my best work at the last minute, right? Which is a post hoc rationalization, right? That basically, if that was the case, then everybody who believed that would leave all their work. They wouldn't even touch it until like a couple of days before, because knowing that full well that that's when they do their best work. So this is something sort of in retrospect that people do to rationalize the procrastination. So by definition, it is never a positive thing. And this leads to some of the difficulties associated with procrastination. If procrastination is harmful delay, then understanding those harms is really important, but also addressing procrastination becomes also very critical too, if we want to reduce those harms. Now, just sort of a bit of background here. I'm saying most of us probably know someone who's procrastinated. We probably procrastinated ourselves. But statistically, we know amongst adult populations, and this varies, depending on cultural factors, where the study was done, the age of the sample, that type of thing. Roughly 15 to 25% of adults are affected by procrastination, and this would be on a regular kind of basis. On sort of, occasional procrastination, we're looking at around 80 to 95% of college and university students engaging in procrastination, which is quite a large, significant proportion of the student sample there. And that is quite concerning, especially because of the impacts on performance, which I'll talk about momentarily. What's more concerning is that 50% of students, college and university students, procrastinate regularly. And that is quite problematic. Now, although we recognize it's very prevalent in academic settings, it also can affect people in terms of their work and productivity in organizational settings. People procrastinate looking after their mental health and looking after their physical health as well. And the other way to sort of think about procrastination too is because we think of it as a one-off behavior sometimes. And this is true. It can be just an occasional occurrence. But because of the nature of the drivers of procrastination, it's very easy for it to turn into a more frequent behavior and habit, which of course can be quite difficult and unfortunate. And so starting up at one spectrum, we can look at sort of procrastination as occurring along a continuum as something that happens occasionally, and then perhaps due to different circumstances may start becoming more habitual and become sort of this chronic procrastination. And from a research perspective, what we often look at is chronic procrastination, because it's easier to measure. All those stipulations around what constitutes procrastination makes it quite difficult to study, say, in a lab or experimental type of setting. So we asked people about how frequently they procrastinate in these self-report measures to get an understanding of sort of the level of chronic procrastination they have, and then look at the causal factors and the consequences from that. So in terms of the implications, so I mentioned with academics, but we know quite clearly, despite people saying they do their best work at the last minute, it's actually associated with poor academic performance, but it's also associated with academic misconduct. And the most notable study I have of this is a German study of over 3,000 university students. And they found that procrastinating at the initial point of the study predicted more academic misconduct over a 6-month period. That's everywhere from fraudulent excuses, plagiarism, using forbidden means in exam, copying others' homework, fabricating data, the whole range of what you might consider academic misconducts. And that, again, this is a strong study because it's over time, and it's suggesting that initial attempts at procrastinating tend to these other non-desirable academic behaviors, which have an impact not just on performance, but also reputation, etc. One of the areas I've looked in over the past couple of decades, of course, is the impacts of procrastination for health. I've been mostly focused on physical health, but a number of researchers have focused on mental health. And it's clear across the board that people who chronically procrastinate do have poor mental health. Anxiety, depression rates are much higher amongst people who chronically procrastinate. But you also see, too, that people who procrastinate have poor physical health for a number of reasons as well. And I'm not going to go into all that research literature, but I will give you kind of a quick synopsis here of where, we have procrastination behavior going to more of a chronic procrastination habit. And some of the outcomes that we've seen across numerous studies is higher levels of stress, larger number of acute health problems. And I should say that outcome, it was within healthy young adults. So university students, that's not problems in middle-aged adults. That's relatively young, healthy students who report higher number of health problems the more that they chronically procrastinate. Middle-aged samples, we see a higher risk for poor heart health, poor coping strategies, putting off seeking appropriate medical care, engaging with health-promoting behaviors, not accessing valuable social support that might help them cope, and for those who have chronic health conditions, having poor coping profiles. Okay, so you see the picture I'm painting here is that procrastination is not good. It's bad for your health. It's bad, not just bad for productivity, but it's bad for your health in other areas as well. Okay, so, the key question there is, if it's such a harmful thing, then why do people do it? Why do we procrastinate? And, in answering this question, you'll see a lot of things on social media, and people get out and share their own experiences, and people will just make observations and come up with conclusions that aren't always backed by the evidence base or even by other people's experiences. And there's a number of reasons for that. So one of the most common myths that we get is that procrastination is just laziness. And this comes from this idea that we see somebody not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so at a very superficial level, observing them, we might think, well, they're just being lazy because they're not getting up and doing what they're supposed to be doing. And there's a number of reasons that we feel that way. A lot of it has to do with the social norms that we have, which I'll get to a little bit later. But one of the reasons we can say that, even on the surface, just quite logically, there's that why procrastination isn't laziness is that, when people feel lazy, and it's fine to kind of say, I feel lazy, it's more of a colloquial term. We don't actually have a psychological definition for laziness. It's not something we actually study, right, or look into. It is just sort of an experience. We casually use that term. But when people feel lazy, they don't feel like doing anything. And yet you'll find people who procrastinate running around, cleaning their offices, cleaning their kitchens, reorganizing their desks, alphabetizing their MP3 files, whatever, anything except that task that they have to do. And so that's not really being lazy then, is it? It's just not getting the task done. Okay. Now, another common myth is that people believe that when people are procrastinating, it's because they lack good time management skills, right? Because ostensibly, if we're looking at that person, they are not meeting deadlines. So they don't know how to manage their time if they're not able to meet a deadline. So it's really just looking again at a very surface level. So it gives that appearance of poor time management. But if you actually look at the evidence on the use of time management strategies to address procrastination, they're Band-Aid solutions at best. So you might see a couple of studies where it might have some short-term effects, but then people will revert back to what they're used to doing in terms of tasks that they have difficulty with. So it's a short-term fix. Other data shows that actually they're not effective at all. So it's not about poor time management. What it is about, from my perspective and from the research that I've been doing over the years, is that it's actually about poor mood management. Okay, and I'll explain to you where we came to this conclusion that it's not poor time management or laziness. It's other things is people have difficulty managing their mood. And it's not something intuitively you think about when you think about procrastination, because we're looking at this behavior. But underlying that behavior and driving that behavior are emotional states. And so this idea was born out of a lot of the research that suggested that people tend to procrastinate on tasks, not that they find fun or exciting or that they're looking forward to, but tasks that they find are ambiguous, that lack structure, that create stress and uncertainty and frustration. Okay, and overall, tasks that they see as being aversive. And so that was some of the first clue then that there's something about an unpleasantness around the task that's going to drive somebody to procrastinate it. And if you think about it then, when we have this aversive task, it creates a negative mood. And as human beings, we like to approach pleasurable, fun things, and we like to recoil and avoid unpleasant things. Okay, that's sort of a part of our basic wiring, if you like. And so almost sort of a knee-jerk reaction to that, and this has a lot to do with the threat centers in the brain, which can sometimes hijack over our best thinking and more of our self-control and that sort of executive functioning. They kick in when we have an unpleasant experience. And if we don't know how to sort of manage that, we can react and then go into an avoidant mode. And so you have this task with this negative mood, you want to avoid it, you put that task aside, and you get immediate emotional relief. So it has this connection to immediate reward because you are relieved of those negative emotions. And it's a short-term mood repair, but it's not really a healthy form of regulating emotions, because healthy forms of regulating emotions tend to have more lasting effects. And we know that procrastination does not have that. Okay, so in a nutshell, we're not avoiding the task. What we're avoiding is the negative emotions linked to that task. And that's really important, because sometimes the tasks that people are avoiding and they procrastinate, to anybody on the outside might look like, well, that's not really an unpleasant task. Why are you avoiding it? So again, it's not always about the task. It's about our relationship to that task and the emotions that we have connected to it. And as I mentioned, we get this relief when we procrastinate, that emotional relief from those negative emotions. And they're not lasting, but it's temporary and it's also quite rewarding. Okay. Now, I just wanted to just quickly go over just a little bit of what we've just covered there in terms of the reasons why people procrastinate. Because there's a couple other reasons some of you might be thinking about, well, she didn't mention this. Okay, so I'm going to just sort of quickly cover this here. All right, so we talked about laziness and poor time management, really surface perceptions of procrastination, these observations of procrastination behavior. Okay, and underneath that, we might say, okay, well, maybe it's about distractions. When people have a lot of social media and fun things around them, these temptations and distractions, maybe that's what's causing the procrastination, right? But actually, that doesn't cause the procrastination. These factors, these types of factors contribute and make procrastination easier, but they don't actually initiate the procrastination. There has to be a deeper underlying reason. And so then we might look at things actually like just poor self-control more generally, or impulsivity. And so someone just can't control themselves. They see a temptation, and so they're going to go follow that instead of do the task, or they're impulsive and they have problems with their attention. But again, why would they do that? Like what's the reason for that? If that was the case, then procrastination should happen with tasks that are pleasant. right? And this is one of the reasons why I said that poor emotion regulation is actually ground zero. And negative emotions are ground zero for procrastination. That's what's driving it all. You have to have that relationship with the task and the negative emotions. All these other things can come in and add to it and make it more difficult. But if you don't tackle those negative emotions, you're unlikely to get a lasting solution to deal with procrastination. Okay, so if you want power over procrastination, then the short message there is you need to take power over your emotions. Okay, so I'm going to move into a section now of the where I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the strategies for taking power over those emotions to better manage procrastination. And this has also led to the development of this toolkit. So what I'm going to do is introduce a little bit about the toolkit and show you go into more depth about some of the evidence and some of what we know about the factors that can lead to negative emotions. Okay, so this toolkit is not launched yet. It will be launched very soon. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that and how you might be able to access it towards the end of the talk. But right now, I just want to introduce it to you and to start giving you some snippets of how it's organized and some of the components in it and the strategies that are involved. And so the approach of that emotions are ground zero for procrastination has informed the development of this tempo toolkit. And one of the reasons that it's informed it not just from an emotional perspective, but also from being more understanding of the emotional difficulties that people have. So as we call it, taming emotions to manage procrastination open-heartedly. And that approach is really important because if we take a harsh stance on procrastination, we're likely to increase the very negative emotions that drove somebody to procrastinate in the first place. And so the development of this toolkit was basically to bring together a lot of the scientific evidence and some of the strategies that we have evidence about and put it into a document, an interactive document that people can use at their own pace to work through, procrastination as they need it. Now, I also wanted to mention that in the development of this, we had focus groups early on about how to structure it and what content to show. And these were, in those focus groups, we only included people who really struggled with procrastination. So your hardcore procrastinators. And half of the group, too, also had ADHD, okay? Because we know that people with ADHD in particular struggle with procrastination. And the key reason for that is because they have issues with emotional dysregulation, which, as we know, is a core, or at least from my perspective anyways, is a core driver of procrastination. Okay, so a key thing with the tempo then, I'm not going to go into all the background and all that, so a lot of it is about teaching people what is and isn't procrastination, why it's harmful, some of the things I just spoke to you about. But then it's understanding where these task-related negative emotions come from so that they can start to tame them and tame the procrastination. And this is just sort of a screenshot from the tempo. So one of the sections, sort of the core of the tempo, is a seek the source section. And this is where we lay out about 7 different strategies that people can engage with as they like. And it's an interactive menu, and it helps them sort of understand why this might cause those negative emotions, and then give them a couple of exercises to help work through those negative emotions. Okay, so in seeking the source, we can also think about the sources of negative emotions as coming from a couple of different places. First of all, we think about the negative emotions that result from the interaction between ourself and the task. So it's not just the task, but it's how we interrelate with that task. But from that perspective, too, it may be something that is more inherent about the task itself. So there are qualities of the task that can come into play, okay, and make it difficult to sort of rather raise these negative emotions that can make it easier to procrastinate and difficult to get on with what we need to do. And so one of the sections in the toolkit focuses specifically on addressing some of the unpleasant qualities of the task that might make it a little bit easier to manage. And we call this Tame the Task to Tame Your Emotions. And some of the strategies, again, these are all evidence-based. I think breaking larger tasks down to smaller ones is somewhat of a well-known strategy, although it's usually placed in the context of, building confidence, and certainly does build confidence when you break a task down into small bits and you achieve each one, and then you're able to sort of move forward with that. But I would argue as well, too, that probably more importantly, that those larger tasks feel overwhelming. So they create feelings of stress, which contribute to those negative emotions, which mean you're going to sort of back away from it. So when you break it down to more manageable pieces, it reduces that stress. So you're actually addressing the negative emotions by sort of reconfiguring and reframing how you look at a larger task by breaking it down to those small pieces. Another strategy here too, and this is quite a common one in different contexts, both in academic and work context and life context too, is where you have a task that's new and you're not really sure what you're supposed to be doing. And so we know from past research that people do tend to procrastinate more on tasks that are ambiguous or that lack a clear structure. And the reason for that is it creates uncertainty. Uncertainty leads to anxiety. It can also lead to doubt and stress, depending on how you react to that uncertainty. And a lot of people don't react well to uncertainty. And so an easy fix there is to actually, if someone senses that they're starting to have that sense of uncertainty around a task, is to make sure that they've asked questions before starting, get any potential missing information, getting advice from others on what they need to do. How did you go about doing this last time, right? Or can you give me advice on how to structure, because I really don't know where to start here. So again, a fairly simple fix there for actually reducing some of the negative emotions that might be more centered around the nature of the task itself. Okay, so that's the one section, but the bulk of the toolkit actually goes more into this other side of things, which is really how we respond to the task. Okay, and I think this is where there's a number of ways in which we can respond to perceived unpleasant tasks in ways that may not be helpful for us to be able to get on with that task, and may actually promote procrastination rather than productivity. And so the remaining strategies within the tempo focus on a number of these different sources. And these are sources that have to do with the way that we interact with the task. You see the names of a couple of them there. I'm going to be going through most of them, but not all of them, because just with time restrictions, just to give you a little bit of a flavor about what those are. Okay, but before we do that, we're going to have a little interactive exercise here. And this is something where I hope everyone can get involved with in the chat box. I want you to think about, just off the top of your head, try not to overthink this, what personal characteristics first come to mind when you think about someone who procrastinates. Okay, like could be personality qualities, could just be characteristics of that individual. So what somebody who procrastinates, what are their qualities? How would you describe them?
Are you seeing all those come in, Dr. Sirois?
I
can read some of them to you under the chat. So it was not motivated, prone to anxiety, lazy, underlying anxiety, unorganized, not confident, chaotic, rebellious, self-destructive, pleasure-seeking, maddening, avoid.
I see them now. Yeah.
Okay.
I wasn't clicking on the right icon there. I'm still getting used to the platform. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, I like the pleasure-seeking in there. That's an interesting one. We've got perfectionism coming up a couple of times. Rebellious. Interesting. Yeah.
Chris, I can see you already took this course.
Okay. Good. I like the witty. That's a different one. Okay. But you can see there's a few different qualities coming up. And these, I ask this question whenever I do talks on perfectionism. On perfectionism. I'm thinking of what's in the chat box there on procrastination. And these, what I'm seeing here is very similar. So it's quite, I think the way we think about people who procrastinate, we have some common ideas. I've just put a couple up here. Disorganized, careless, undisciplined, poor willpower. Some people say creative as well too. Apart from the creative one, which I think that there isn't actually any evidence to link creativity with procrastination, despite what some people believe. Most of these qualities, you'll notice they are quite negative, right? They're things that we see. We don't go say, oh, they're a wonderful, happy person. These are negative qualities. And this is maybe come from our own experience of procrastinating, but it's also linked to some of the social norms that we have around procrastination. So our social norms in society, so those collective ideas we have about what is sort of proper, correct behavior versus incorrect behavior in terms of society's goals. That's what we can think about as social norms, and they operate more or less unconsciously. But they do affect our behavior. And so we have very strong, at this time in society, we have very strong social norms about productivity, right? So if someone's productive, they're a good person, right? Like all you have to do is look on any social media or the web or anywhere. It's like how to squeeze more tasks into a day, how to be more productive, how to use your time more wisely. All these books sell quite well. But the flip side of this then, and that's the prevailing social norm on productivity, is that, and if you're procrastinating, you're not getting your things done, which means you're transgressing these social norms. And so you're not contributing to society, and you can't be relied upon. You're not you're not dependable. And so we internalize a lot of this, especially if we're procrastinating. This is operating at sort of a somewhat unconscious level, and for other people it's more conscious. I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing, right? And when people experience that they're engaging in bad behavior, they feel guilt. But if they engage in bad behavior frequently, so procrastination is a chronic issue, they then may start to view themselves as a bad person and experience shame and want to hide their procrastination. And it's these negative feelings then connected to these social norms that can also contribute to some of the negativity that people experience when they're procrastinating, which, as you can imagine, can continue to prompt them to procrastinate. So we have this task, and then we have our inner stories about that task. Some of these are based on social norms, and depending on those inner stories, that may increase or decrease those negative emotions. And a lot of them, unfortunately, do increase those negative emotions. So perfectionism, when we start thinking it's not quite good enough, or it's not going to be good enough for people, or we are self-critical towards ourselves. When we procrastinate, lower levels of self-esteem. We don't feel good about ourselves when we're procrastinating because we know we're breaking these social norms. And we may also experience self-doubt. And so a lot of these negative thoughts then generate even more negative emotions than what was there in the first place that prompted people to procrastinate. And then all of this then too, if you're someone who regularly procrastinates, this can feed into sort of ruminating about the procrastination and just worrying about it and thinking a lot about it. And these are have been sort of nicknamed these procrastinatory cognitions, or basically thoughts about procrastination. And there's been a number of studies done looking at the thoughts that people have when they procrastinate, and they're not fun-loving and I'm having a great time. They are, I really don't like myself. What's wrong with me? I'm not going to reach my goals. I'm letting myself and others down. And what's been shown is that when people engage in this sort of negative thinking, it actually increases their negative emotions and then makes them more likely to procrastinate, a couple of weeks later. And that was one of the strongest studies to sort of show the link between these thoughts and the negative emotions. So another source of these negative emotions is these self-critical thoughts. And all of this then can turn into a downward spiral of continued procrastination. Okay. Another source is when we might make what I call an emotional mountain out of a molehill. And this is when we have a task. It's often an unfamiliar task to us, and we kind of get ourselves very worked up about how difficult or frustrating or time consuming it's going to be. And it seems like this huge, huge thing that we're never going to be able to, get on top of. And then if we actually start working on that task, we can find that our expectation for what that task is going to be like actually doesn't match well the reality of what it actually is in terms of difficulty, time consumption, stress, etc. And we call this effective forecasting. And there's been numerous scientific studies showing that as human beings, we're actually not really good at having a clear emotional crystal ball to sort of predict what our future emotional states will be. So even when we're thinking about a task and how difficult it's going to be, we tend to overblow those negative emotions and tend to see things as much worse than what they really are. Okay, and so there's a section in the toolkit then that specifically addresses this idea of making emotional mountains out of molehills. And what it focuses on then is the idea that when we think about that anticipated difficulty or frustration and the commitment, we're doing it in an echo chamber, right? It's exclusive to all else that's going on in our lives. And so the way to break this pattern then is to start reminding yourself of all the other things that you might be doing within that time frame. So if you have a task that's due over the next month, you think about everything else that you're going to be doing. So you have comparators now to view just how negative that task might be. And it also helps you make better emotional forecasts. And it could be positive tasks or negative tasks, easy, difficult, etc. And so getting people to actually describe these tasks and think about them in more detail then gives you a stronger reference point from which to actually think about, well, actually this task is going to be a little bit difficult, but it's not going to be that bad, in comparison to some of the other things that are going on. And it also can help us, you can also help get people to think about the coping resources they might have that might help them get through that challenge. Okay, so these negative emotions then, when we're seeking the source, we have the task, it has some negative qualities to it. But that may also then lead to procrastination. But then when we procrastinate, we've got things like social norms and our own inner stories coming into play. And so you can kind of get these feedback loops and sort of this transaction between the task and the way we relate to tasks that can really get things spinning out of control with respect to the emotions and the procrastination. Okay. And just quickly get you to think about how you might respond to difficulties when you're working on a task or a goal. And I've got the second quick poll here too. Have you got that one ready? Yep. Okay. So think about you're working on a task or a goal, okay, and something goes wrong. You hit a bump in the road, you make a mistake, you have a lapse if you said, I'm going to continue to do this, and you stop doing it. What's your go-to response? What would be your first sort of knee-jerk response to running into a problem or making a mistake on a task that you were working on? So do you tend to be critical and harsh? Do you show yourself kindness and consideration? Or maybe you try to be kind, but you kind of default to being too critical, just to kind of get an idea of where people are at. Okay, I've got a few votes in there. I don't see anything coming up under the show kindness and consideration, which is actually not surprising at all. So I think the two most popular categories tend to be critical and harsh towards yourself. That's how most people respond. So there's nothing unusual about that. But it can also create problems for trying to recover from procrastination and get back on track. Okay. Because the inner voice that we have when we are responding to these difficulties tends to be more critical, less compassionate and forgiving, even when having these negative self-thoughts can be, much less harmful. So you can see sort of on the left-hand side there, that's the compassionate response. And that's something that most of us aren't really familiar with having. What's more likely is something more negative, where we kind of are, have these very negatively directed thoughts towards ourselves, self-blaming and really not feeling good about things. And I refer to this as sort of the devil, and this is another section in the toolkit because even though those thoughts aren't particularly helpful and don't make us feel better, they're the devil we know. It's familiar, right? And so trying something else, like trying to be compassionate, which might be hard, and we don't know if that's going to make us lazy or make us not productive. We'd rather stick with something unpleasant that we know than try something else which may potentially be difficult. Okay, but there are ways around that. Okay, and these thoughts come into play most typically when we have a goal, we've set out where we want to go, and we got this idea, I've got a plan, get everything laid out, it's all set, I'm ready to go, and all I need to do is implement my plan, and boom, I've got my goal, I'm there, right? Yeah, maybe in an ideal world, but we know that goal pursuit doesn't happen like that. We tend to expect a perfect upward trajectory, but in reality, when we pursue goals, the pathway to reaching that goal tends to look a little bit more like this, okay, where we've got a lot of ups and downs and a lot of difficulties, unexpected twists and turns. We might lapse. And when we experience those lapses is when we're more likely to have those negative self-critical responses. And that is when the risk for procrastination and perhaps even abandoning the goal is most likely. But if we learn to change how people respond to goal lapses, then this can help them recover from those lapses and foster a more successful pathway and a more pleasant pathway towards reaching that goals. And one way to do that is with self-compassion. Okay. And so self-compassion is a term that's, I think, made its way into the popular press and the media a lot more in recent years. There's a couple of different versions of it, but Kristen Neff has quite a nice definition of it, and it's about taking this kind and understanding stance towards yourself in times of difficulty or failure, rather than being harsh and self-critical. And it's pretty much showing if somebody else is going through a difficult time, you would be compassionate towards them, but we find that much harder to do towards ourselves. And so this approach of being self-compassionate is taking that compassion we might show others and learning to do it to ourselves. And there's three key components involved, which one is showing ourselves self-kindness. So it's not just self-kindness. One is being mindful of our emotions, which is not, it's not the mindfulness practice per se, but it's not being overwhelmed by negative emotions and trying to keep them in balance. And I think the component to me, which is really key here, is the common humanity, which is seeing that to be human is to suffer. We all make mistakes. We all have difficulties. And when you recognize that, you don't feel as isolated, you don't feel as bad, and it can reduce shame. Now, all these components work together to sort of coalesce into this sort of more self-compassionate response to difficulties. Unfortunately, though, there's also the flip side, which is the negative side or low self-compassion. And this, in a lot of the research that I've done with procrastination and self-compassion, it's clearly shown that people who chronically procrastinate tend to experience low self-compassion. So they're disapproving and judgmental about their flaws. When they feel down, they tend to feel isolated, and the others are doing better. And again, that shame and those social norms. And they tend to blow things out of proportion, engage in those procrastinatory cognitions, and feel more negative about things. Okay. And these negative poles then are what generate some of the negative emotions. But one of the key things too, I think, and when we do research on self-compassion to reduce procrastination, one of the components that comes out, I think that's really strong, is to remind people that you're not the first person to procrastinate, nor will you be the last. That's the common humanity. Everyone does it. You saw the statistics earlier on. And I think the problem is because of those strong productivity social norms, we often forget that. We get this message about you have to be productive all the time. And so when we're not, we tend to feel more isolated and forget that this is something that is quite common. And so this issue is dealt with in the "Is it just me?" section, where people can feel like it's just me that's procrastinating rather than recognizing that other people do as well. And so some of the instructions that we give, I'd use these in both experiments, and some of this is integrated into the toolkit too, is to help people reframe their experiences with procrastination, especially while they're procrastinating, in more of from a more self-compassionate stance. So recognizing it's a common human weakness, trying to take a balanced perspective on one's emotions, try to be kind and accepting as if you would like you would towards a friend, and getting them to write about that. And what we found is actually this very simple set of instructions is very effective for, in the moment at least, increasing people's levels of self-compassion. And that can be the trick then, if they're feeling really hard on themselves, to sort of dial down those negative emotions that might be keeping them in a procrastination loop and be able to move forward. Okay, got my eye on the clock there, so I'm trying to get through here. Just very, very briefly here. I think the other thing we need to consider is that not only is procrastination driven by stress and it creates stress, but when people are in a stressful time period of their life, that may make them more prone to procrastination. And it's important to recognize that. So vulnerability for procrastination increases if somebody's going through something difficult. So if someone who may not normally procrastinate is now procrastinating, that should be a red flag that there may be something going on in the background that's prompting that change in behavior. And sort of the last strategy here is about meaning. I'm just going to skip over this slide because it's really just more of a general thing about, often that we have difficulty trying to find meaning in menial tasks, but meaning can be actually a very powerful tool to help people, move from sort of the specific goal they have to one that might be a little bit more overarching and give them a stronger sense of purpose with that goal. And the reason that I've included meaning in the toolkit is also because of some research that was done with a former PhD student. I know this looks very technical here, but basically she gave the people who are at risk for procrastinating a simple exercise to reframe their task in a more meaningful way, and compared this with people who just thought about their task more positively versus people who just wrote about their task. And when she followed up with them, we found that people who reframed their task in a meaningful way spent less time procrastinating over the next couple of days on that task, even compared to those who just tried to think about the task in a more positive way. And so what that suggests then is that meaning making can be a very powerful tool for reducing procrastination. And these are the instructions, these are in the toolkit, but very simple set of instructions where people just complete the end of that phrase. And that's what she did in that experiment that I just showed you some of the stats from and the results from, is just got them to reframe the task this way. And that was enough to reduce significantly the amount of time they procrastinated on that task. Okay, so there's a very whirlwind tour of some of the strategies that are in the Tempo toolkit. As I mentioned, it has a number of different sections within it. A lot of it's about background, and as well seeking the source. And then there's a couple of finish up sections at the end to sort of help people think about other things like those social media distractions and trying to, move away any of those other additional factors that might come in and make, applying these strategies more challenging. And although the toolkit is not launched just yet, it will be officially launched in 2025. Probably we're looking February, March potentially. We are currently taking a survey of people who might be interested in hearing about the launch when it comes out. So once it's ready, if you sign up on the survey, you would get an email saying, hey, the toolkit's available with a link to the toolkit. But the other thing we're doing right now too is we are beta testing it. So we have a version of the toolkit, and we're looking for people to engage with it, answer a couple of questions before and after engaging with it, just to give some feedback on it, to see what parts they're using, how they might be effective, and any other feedback they might have, so that we can do some final tweaks before the official launch in 2025.
And we'll send this link out with a post-webinar replay.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so we've gone through our covered in the workshop webinar there. So we know it's harmful delay, that's bad for productivity, health, and well-being. We procrastinate basically to cope with negative emotions linked to a task. And there's a number of different approaches, including minimizing stressful aspects of the task, being more compassionate, and finding meaning that science and the evidence suggests can be effective for managing procrastination. So takeaway message, you want to manage procrastination better, you need to better manage your emotions. I've also got some social media links. I have a page filled with videos, animations, blog articles, and other things if you're curious and want to read a little bit more about this approach. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Sirois. And I did go ahead and publish that last poll. So if anyone wants to complete that before you leave, I know that I feel much more confident, even though I can't vote on this because I'm publishing it. But that was extraordinarily helpful. I mean, I do think for a lot of people, I notice there are a lot of people here from schools that are working with students. Certainly we work with students, really walking away with that message of self-compassion and helping with strategies to break the task down and really thinking about the words that they're saying to themselves just by understanding the words we may say to ourselves. Mm-hmm. I think by us having compassion, especially practitioners that work with people that have that procrastinate, by us having compassion and really better understanding their self-view, we can be so much more helpful for them. So we are very grateful to you. Thank you so much. I know this is not the end of our journey because we're going to continue working together on the toolkit. Mm-hmm. If anybody's interested in learning more, and you can certainly email info@thestudypro.com. I'll put in there, and we can definitely, you have Dr. Sirois' information here, and I'm going to send that out with the replay. So thank you, everybody, for attending. We will have a webinar in December, and I'll send that information out shortly. So we're very excited to have Debbie Reber from Tilt Parenting, and she's going to talk about her book, which is differently wired children. So if you're a parent of a differently wired child and feel that you're all alone, I promise you this is a great webinar to attend. So please look out for that. But I just want to thank everybody for your patience today. I know we were a few minutes late, but Dr. Sirois, we're super grateful. And we're really excited about continuing our work together and bringing this toolkit to everyone that we can share it with. So thank you, everybody, for attending. And thank you, Dr. Sirois.
Well, thank you.
Have a great day, everybody. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.